glad there's only one more Pony Canyon Dungeons & Dragons game after this. The background on them is just too convoluted. Of the 4 Dungeons & Dragons games that they licensed from SSI to make console ports of the computer games, Pool of Radiance is the only RPG. TSR, the creators of Dungeons & Dragons, and SSI developed the scenario for the game together. TSR releasing it as a module called Ruins of Adventure. The computer game was released first, but the module's really the source. Pool of Radiance, the computer game, was the first in a very long-running series of computer games built on the same engine. These are collectively called the Gold Box games because they came in gold boxes. And they consisted of several linked scenarios. When you completed Pool of Radiance, you could take your characters and bring them into the next game in the series, perhaps with a side trip to Hillsfar first, a game we've already seen on the Famicom. The video game is based on the first edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and if you're wondering why they were using First Edition in 1991, well, this port's arriving 3 years after the original game. The sequels to Pool of Radiance used Second Edition rules, but they didn't get console releases. The plot of the game has players arriving in the city of Flan, a once thriving metropolis that was destroyed in a magical disaster decades ago. It's now being rebuilt, and the new settlers need assistance clearing out monsters from the rest of the city, one region at a time. It gives the game a very episodic structure, but it works pretty well. You find the chunk of the city that you're the right level to go through, and work on clearing out the monsters there. There is a larger plot that very slowly unfolds as you progress through the game, but it's a pretty thin one. The first thing you do when you start up the game is create a party of 5 characters. That's 1 less than what you could have in the computer versions. And the character creation is not nearly as free-form. Rather than picking a race, class, and gender, these are already broken down into a handful of selections for you. Want to have a dwarven cleric? Tough luck, it's not on the list. You also lose the ability to customize character portraits and icons. Then you have to roll your stats. And I'm not sure what method they're using for the stat rolls here, but you never see any stat go below 11. I suspect it's 10 plus 2d4 and then racial adjustment bonuses, but it's definitely not 3d6 or even 4d6 drop the lowest. With your party created and assembled, you arrive in Flan. After a brief tour of the town that deposits you naked and weaponless before the entrance to the first combat area, you need to turn around, go buy some armor and weapons, and have all of your spellcasters prepare spells. The disturbingly long equipment list from the original game has been greatly reduced here, and in one quirk of the translation, all of your equipment is in English, albeit written out in katakana, while all of the spell names have been translated to Japanese. Considering that old D&D had a lot of spells that had fairly similar names, I actually found it a bit difficult to tell which spell was which in the list. Okay, technically at level 1 you really only need Sleep and Cure Light Wounds, but for some of them I was wavering back and forth on what the translation was referring to. You'll mostly be exploring the city from this first-person viewpoint, and hitting the A button brings up a submenu. Choosing the camp option will let you stop, rest, and prepare spells, but you can't do it within the settled area of the city. The guards will get on your case if you try. From that submenu you can also equip items, and switch to a map of the general area. You're even able to navigate on that map, though it doesn't show any doors. When you're all set, you can head off to an area infested by monsters, and start looking around. These zones will have some areas with fixed monster encounters, just entering the room will trigger them, and there's also monsters that are just roaming around. When you encounter a group of monsters, you have a choice to just attack them, or you could try to converse with them a bit. You can even attempt to run away without engaging in combat, and that will deposit you at a random spot on the map. Combat is played out on a tactical map, which actually represents the terrain that you're standing in. Okay, it makes everything really wide, but the floor plan that you see in the battles is the floor plan that you are standing in. Turn order is randomly determined, and on your turn you can move, attack, cast spells, exactly the things that you'd expect. moving into an enemy will attack them, or you could also choose to manually target someone. Combat is where Pool of Radiance really shows its flaws, and they're not really flaws with the video game, they're fundamental problems with the advanced Dungeons & Dragons rule set. For example, any spell that freezes an enemy in place is an automatic I win button. So at level 1, you have mages stand back and cast sleep, and then your party just kills all of the sleeping monsters. There's an entire progression of spells like this too, and as you increase in levels, combat comes down to whoever gets off their instant win spell first. This era of D&D also has a pretty severe first level problem. Because your hit points are randomly assigned, it is very likely for a first level character to have hit points so low that an attack from any random monster will kill them instantly. For example, my fighter cleric had 2 hit points, and that was with a constitution bonus. Now you can, and you really should, reroll characters if their hit points are too low, but even then, a first level mage has a maximum of 4 hit points. A short sword can do 6 hit points of damage. You're probably going to go through quite a few characters until you get some that survive long enough to reach level 2. And because this is Dungeons & Dragons, level 2 requires a lot of experience. In fact, the level cap for Pool of Radiance is about level 6, give or take a level depending on the class. Now you might say to yourself, that doesn't sound like much, and it really isn't. Most parties will reach the level cap around halfway through the game, assuming there isn't a whole lot of multiclassing going on. Pool of Radiance seems to have a bit of a mixed reputation in Japan. Most of the recent comments I found about it talk about how rare the game is and how the prices shot up in recent months. And I can confirm that. I was finding copies for about 1,500 yen a bit more than a year ago, and I wound up paying about 4,000 yen for my copy because it was the only copy I had seen come up for sale for months. Beyond that, some people lump it in with the other bad D&D games that Pony Canyon released, while others praise its combat system. I'll say that if you only wanted to play Pool of Radiance, then the console port's not a bad option. It streamlines a lot of the weird cruft for you. However, the only reason that you'd want to play Pool of Radiance 30 years after its release is if you were doing a series playthrough, taking characters through the 4 linked scenarios. And you can't do that here. None of the other Gold Box games made their way to a console, let alone the Famicom. So this port stands off by itself. One isolated game in what was supposed to be a series.